Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. This workshop is designed to equip us with skills on how to better ourselves and identify and address issues concerning race and racism. In addition, we hope to discuss fundamental concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to hear unique perspectives and insight on these important topics, so we encourage you to participate. You can either use the chat room or we will unmute everybody and you can join us that way as well. We just want to encourage participation and keep this informative. Thank you. So with that, what I'm going to do is introduce our panelists. First, we have Stephen Francis. He's the president and founder of Franchise Diversity and Inclusion. He's an OSU alumni. Then he's also from Columbus, Ohio, and joining us from there today. We have Maurice Hall, who's a 2002 national championship. He was on the 2002 national championship team, and today he's pursuing a career in acting. He wrote, directed, and produced the movie Baker's Man, so check that out if you haven't seen it. And then last, we have Jim Jackson. Next to last, I should say, we have Jim Jackson. He's a two-time first All-American OSU basketball player, 14-year career in the NBA, and now he's a basketball analyst for Fox Sports. And then myself, Yurvi Saturia with the OSU LA board, and live here. We're all in Los Angeles. So Steve, with that, we'll let you take over.
Thanks, Yurvi, and thanks everybody for joining this Sunday afternoon. I know you have probably much better things to do, and I appreciate your time on this very important topic. As Yurvi mentioned, I'm president and lead strategist of my diversity and inclusion consulting firm, Franchise D&I Solutions. The name Franchise is after Stevie Franchise, which my golf buddies call me. I do happen to play basketball, or did have some hops, so the name is appropriate, and I thought it'd be a good business name for my firm. I'm honored to be on this workshop with, a football icon and a basketball icon. I'm a big sports fan, and I couldn't be happier to have Jim Jackson and Maurice Hall on this esteemed panel, along with my very good friend Yurvi Saturia, a member of the OSU LA Alumni Club. And thank you, Yurvi, for making this happen and for your vision and dedication to enlightening people on this very important topic related to all the social unrest and racial injustice that's going on in our world now. So with that, let's jump right in. We have a lot of material and a lot of discussion to hear from our panelists. The first slide, I wanted to introduce you to some fundamental concepts of what we'll be talking about today. First is diversity. In the diversity profession, we say diversity is a fact. I like to say that as long as people continue to have babies with folks that don't look like them or are from different places, we're going to have diversity. And I submit that no walls or laws can prevent the inevitable diversification of our society here in America. And so those who reckon with that fact tend to be ahead of the game, whether you're an alumni association, a football organization, a corporation, or a nonprofit organization. The next concept is inclusion. And we believe that that's an act. While the word diversity is a noun, it is what you are, it's a state of being, the word inclusion is a verb. It's an action word that requires you to do something affirmative to that diversity or with that diversity, to engage it in everything that you do as an organization, or to respect it and value it and appreciate it. So we like to say that diversity is useless if it's not included. And we'll expound upon these words later as we define them for you in various ways. The next key concept is equity. Equity is being used quite a bit in the diversity profession these days. And I like to say that diversity must be exact. You can't go down to Kroger's or whatever Target store and pick something off the shelf and think that that's going to meet the needs of a unique, diverse individual. You have to meet them where they happen to be in order to fully understand what their needs are, in order for them to fulfill a full and rich life and to be able to access the opportunities that they might not otherwise be able to access. So equity being exact is very, very important. You can't standardize equity because it's not going to fit for everybody. Again, equity takes effort. And so if you're in this diversity profession and you want to meet somebody with equity, you have to do something to make sure that you meet their needs. And this final concept is going to be an extensive part of what we'll be discussing today, but race is a social construct. And I'd like for the participants to agree or disagree with me on this before I expound upon why I think race is a social construct. So anybody can unmute themselves and chime in. Do you agree or disagree that race is a social construct? And I'll give you a few minutes to unmute yourself and just share your thoughts.
Steve, I think you should, so tell me exactly what you mean by social construct.
It was constructed by society as basically a fallacy or a process to categorize people in a way that one race is superior than another race. And put differently, Maurice, and thanks for asking the question because I can't throw it out there naked. Colonials came over to this country and decided that it would be better to classify them versus others that they found to be inferior or less sophisticated. In other words, they didn't know what to do with the land, so they took it from them, type of thing. Or at least that racial social construct set that opportunity up for them to, take this land and do something better than those natives could do with it. So with that backdrop, anybody disagree or agree with me on that?
We have someone in the chat room that said they agree the definition of what white is in the U.S. has changed over time and continues to change.
That's right. In fact, Hispanics were not white. And then when the war broke out and they needed more labor, they all of a sudden made Hispanics white so that they could be enfranchised or empowered or accepted into this mainstream society so that they could work. And then when immigration started to really happen heavily, then they backed them out again. So they weren't white anymore. They were immigrants, subject to getting their green card and having to get citizenship. Any other thoughts on race as a social construct? Anything in the chat box?
No, nothing in the chat box.
All right, well, let's move on. The next slide, we want to just throw out some food for thought for a discussion on this important topic of racism. And I just have some statements that I want to read to you, and I just want you to process them mentally as we head into sort of the meat of our discussion on racism. Don't invite me to have a seat at the table after the table has already been set. You know, we often hear the term, we want to have everybody have a seat at the table, right? And so how disingenuous is that when you invite them to the table that you've already set the rules on, right? Why don't you, in the spirit of inclusion, invite them to the table before you set the agenda and ask them to help you set the agenda? That's true inclusion. And that's what we mean by that statement. The next statement, we need leaders to not just ask the right questions, but to also question the wrong answers. And by this we mean, yeah, leaders have to ask those hard questions. For example, why do our job postings have minimum of 5 years experience? What if somebody has 4.5 years experience and has a diverse perspective that goes beyond those years of experience? Why do we have a hard and fast 5 or more years? And so those are the kinds of questions that need to be asked. And the wrong answer is, well, because it's always been that way, boss. That's the wrong answer. I think that the right answer is, well, we'll have to look into that. I really don't know why it's 5 years. Maybe it should be something different. The next
So
thought.
Steve, can we talk to us? There's someone that said they should answer all questions. They should question all answers. Who's determining right from wrong?
Well, that's a good point. My point on that thought is the leader knows what's right and what's wrong, right? And by that I mean, by that I mean you agree that because it's always been that way is a wrong answer, correct? I mean, so that's one example of them challenging the answer in a way that will get a better answer. You know, maybe there are no right or wrong answers, but there can be better answers than that's the way it's always been. Any other chat comments?
No, not right now.
Okay, the third thought for discussion, addressing racism and being an ally against racism requires 3 C's. The capacity to understand. By that, I mean understanding what racism means and what it's all about. The capability to act. And the culture to represent and believe in. In this game called racism, we don't want you to disavow your culture. We want you to be proud of it and represent it so that others would want to learn about it, and vice versa. You would want to learn about their strong, proud culture in a way that we can all coexist. That's the ultimate goal here. And lastly, leaders must have courage, another 3C, to admit they don't know and want to learn about race and privilege. In other words, there's several stages of competence. I don't know, you're clueless. I know I don't know. And that's what this statement gets to. They admit that they don't know and they want to learn. I know what I know is the next stage of competency. They're learning things and they know exactly what they do know. There's still some things they don't know. And then that last phase of competence is others know that you know. In other words, I can't say I'm good with women. Women have to say, well, Steve Francis respects women and he understands the power of women and he respects gender equality. I can't say that. Women have to say that to affirm my competence. And then character to hold themselves accountable for their mistakes, right? How many of you know someone who knows it all, right? Never makes a mistake. Those are the most dangerous people walking the face of the earth. And commitment to take real action towards change. I can't tell you how many statements I've been reviewing for clients in the wake of George Floyd. And they want to issue a statement on how they're standing with and they're committed to and they're striving towards. But that's not action. Many statements have contained specific bullet points of action that they're taking to make sure that their organization is not racist or that there are zero tolerance related to racial conduct within the organization. That's the kind of commitment that we need from leaders when it comes to dealing with racism. Any questions, chat comments before we move on to the next slide?
I don't see any chat comments.
All right. I got this piece from Korn Ferry, which is a noted national diversity inclusion consulting firm. And I'm a certified trainer with that organization. I do some inclusive leadership training on Korn Ferry curriculum, so I use them quite a bit. They know what they're talking about. And so I'd like to take you through certain bullet points on what it means to be a true ally against racism. These are actual things you can do to help yourself be an ally or a better ally against racism. First bullet, understand racism. And we talked about, I know what I know what I don't know on the previous slide. Everybody has room to grow and learn in this area, even Black folk, right? And so we hear the word white privilege, that throws a lot of white folks off. They feel like that's a personal attack on them. But the goal here is to understand how one benefits from a systemic and institutional process of white privilege that pervades all throughout society. So first we read really good books on the topic. Ibram Kendi has a book out now, How to Be an Anti-Racist, #1 bestseller. Many years ago, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote The Souls of Black Folk, which is very instructive. Michelle Alexander, which used to be a professor at The Ohio State University, wrote the phenomenal book, The New Jim Crow, about the prison industrial complex and how disproportionately African Americans have been in prison due to war on drugs and all of the stop and frisk laws, etc. And then James Baldwin, another old book where he has just a conversation on race, he calls a rap on race, with a white colleague of his. And then Robin DiAngelo, the book White Fragility, I'm sure many of you have heard about her book, and she keeps it real as it relates to white fragility and how that reflects itself in our society. The next bullet, a true ally against racism embraces their own cultural identity. And again, here this shows up again. Be proud of your culture and teach others why you're proud, and that invites them to teach you about their culture and why they're so proud. And again, I think there's plenty of room for us to coexist. This will help you understand how your culture is viewed by others in ways that may surprise even you, right? So if you invite that conversation, you might learn about what others think about your culture, and some of it may be based on systemic bias, societal bias, and stereotypes that are promoted by our society that you didn't even realize other folks were thinking about your culture. And then you better understand your differences, and more importantly, you're able to engage others in their differences. And you'll see later on that we want you to lean into differences, not back away from differences. Lean into your discomfort. Next point about being a true ally in racism, a true ally leads with transparency and humility. Bring your true self to work and encourage others to do the same. Not revealing who you are and where you come from leads to assumptions counter to diversity and inclusion. So in other words, if you don't state who you are, what you believe in, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything type of mentality, others will be able to fill in that blank for you. So you don't want to identify, you want to identify yourself. You don't want others to identify you. And I actually have an icebreaker exercise in some of my trainings that I facilitate. It's called Let Me Identify Myself. And that hammers home the importance of us wanting, letting others identify who they are for themselves. Next point. And true ally against racism is cross-culturally and cross-racially agile. Blacks who have a direct communication style are confrontational. Whites with the same traits are straight shooters, or they show initiative, right? Tall white males are seen as leaders, but tall black males are a threat. And I think that Maurice Hall and Jim Jackson qualify as tall black men. I want you guys to weigh in. Have you ever been considered a threat, or has anybody ever moved to the other side of the street while you were walking down the street, or clutched their purse in the elevator, or what have you?
Well, I'll say, first of all, I'm not tall at all. If I'm standing next to Jim, I'm not tall. I'm 5'10", so I'm probably average height. But I will say, from a athletic build standpoint, it feels the same. And being obviously bald-headed, for some reason, being a bald-head black man is even more intimidating than being with someone with hair. But I have, yeah. I mean, I've definitely experienced that aspect of getting a second look if you're standing too close in the elevator to someone who, or obviously I've had a lot of the door locks as I'm walking to my car and someone sees me like approaching, I've seen door locks a numerous amounts of time. But so, yeah, definitely have seen the perception of what I look like, identified and a reaction to it before I open my mouth or anything like that.
What about you, Jim?
No, I mean, I am tall, so I do fit that description. But yeah, it's happened before. I mean, when I was growing up, even when I was older, you could kind of see it coming a little bit. Maybe somebody feels uncomfortable in a situation, especially when you're in a closed-in space, whether that's an elevator, stairwell, whatever it may be. You may get it. I try not to pay too much attention to it, but it is obvious sometimes that because of the perception of what they may see or think or heard, depending on the age and the demographic of that person, they'll react accordingly. Because I've seen it happen when it's been, a white guy with tattoos all on his body. When there's a white person walking on the street, they may cross because of what they may perceive. So it kind of goes both ways. But I've seen a lot of stuff like Maurice talked about, the kind of door locks or clutch the purse or do things like that. I've seen it. I've experienced it.
Good. I saw a chat comment or question pop up. Can colleges and universities use bullet point number 1 as book club reference material? Absolutely. In fact, I've been advocating, I used to speak at the Ohio State University Conference on Race, Diversity, and Learning. And I used to advocate for all colleges and universities to have a 101, 201, 301 course in diversity and inclusion. Just as important as any of these other topics. So yes, definitely. Number 5, an ally against racism demolishes the one job away excuse. And here's how this plays out. With white people, it's you've never done this before, but go for it. I put my neck on the line for you. With black people, it's you've never done this before, so you're not ready. And let me give you an example of how this plays out in gender. Jim Jackson walks in the office and I say to Jim, hey, Jim, you and I have been buddies for years. I've known your dad since I've known you since you were little. You hit that softball real well in the softball league. Hey, there's this vice president job opening and I'm going to stick my neck out for you because I believe in you. Now you go for it. Make me proud. Don't disappoint me. Yervy comes in my office right after Jim leaves and says, Yervy, you're a superstar. You knocked it out the park in that meeting. You finished that project ahead of schedule. You are a future leader in this company. I'm going to give you a growth project and you'll be ready to go to the next level. Now, what happened there was Jim got the VP promotion sight unseen. Yervy got a growth project, but no promotion. And you see
And over
how,
the years, I've had a lot of growth projects.
but you see how the second time Jim comes in, he gets promoted to SVP, and Yerby gets another project, right? So that happens time and time again, and you see why there's a gender wage gap in all of our corporate and nonprofit organizations. It's real life stuff that happens, and it's based on biases that, darn it, that woman just isn't ready, right? So let's go to the next slide.
Steve, before we go to the next slide, there was somebody that commented on the transparency bullet point, and that person said they agree that everyone needs to lead with transparency. Leaders need to share their story in order to relate and be transparent.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for that comment. Now, this diagram is what we call becoming anti-racist, and there's 3 zones: a fear zone, a learning zone, and a growth zone on becoming anti-racist. And I want the chat box to get active during this slide, and I'll ask a couple of questions. Now, I'm not assuming that anyone on this call is racist. So pretend like this is a friend that you know, or someone that you've been exposed to, and you're answering that question about somebody else. So the first question for the chat box is, have any of the participants observed conduct that's reflected in that fear zone by one of their friends, family, relatives, enemies, people they play golf with, go to church with, etc.? And I'll give you a couple of minutes to respond to that. I deny racism is a problem, fear zone. I avoid hard questions, fear zone. I strive to be comfortable. And we're humans we're human beings that love comfort. I get that, but that's fear zone. I talk to others who look and think like me. There's a diversity inclusion book called Why Do All the Black People Sit Together in the Cafeteria? And it's a very old book, but it's a pioneer book in understanding this thing called, or better understanding this thing called race. So any comments from the chat box? Have you observed this behavior in anyone else in the fear zone?
You know, Steve, there's no comments in the chat box, but I'll tell you, when I first saw this slide, I actually looked at it for myself and just thought, where am I on this scale? Where can I be better? What are things? And I was kind of like all over the place on everything, but it helps you realize like how you can be better if you want, you know, or where you want to strive for.
Absolutely. You know, even though I asked you to answer it for a friend, certainly I want you to be introspective about this and honest and open.
And so I just want to share a little bit. I remember, so a friend of mine who I used to work with, you know, I know once the George Floyd thing happened and the protests around the country started happening, she reached out to me. And the one thing that she initially said was, you know, I don't see color. So I never viewed like any differences between one person or the next. And what I said to her, I said, you know, well, the thing I want you to do is to see color, because if you see color, you can see the differences of how people are being treated based on that color. So I think that ties into the I deny racism is a problem, because, you know, if you don't see the differences based on, you know, color, because you're saying, I don't see color, I think everybody's treated the same, you know, it's an awakening when you do. And I think she started to, once everything started happening, and what she said was, you know, I'm just usually in my bubble, and, you know, it's never really affected me. And kind of COVID mixed with the protest has allowed me to pay a little more attention to it. And now I see there is a difference. So I thought that was interesting.
That's a great point, Maurice, and I'm glad you brought that up. There is a TED Talk by Melody Hobson, a,
Mm.
a world-renowned financial analyst,
Mhm.
who has a TED Talk called "Don't Be Color Blind, Be Color Brave." So it's color brave, not color blind. And she tells her own story. She's married to George Lucas of Star Wars fame, the Star Wars movie producer. And she talks about how she came from humble beginnings, and then she was taught, hey, we need to be colorblind. But no, that's the wrong approach. And again, remember in the previous slides, we talked about standing on your culture, being proud of it. And to your point, Maurice, you said, hey, I want to treat everybody the same. Well, equity, as we'll get into later, fair is not equal, right? And so that equity must be exact. It can't be cookie cutter. Any other comments come in?
We have someone that just said they've observed this many times with friends in their community.
Good. Let's go to the next zone when we learn a little bit more. We're in the learning zone. Starting at the bottom, I listen to others who think and look differently than me. I am vulnerable about my own biases and knowledge gaps. This is I know I don't know zone, right? You know what you don't know. At least you're not clueless. I educate myself about race and structural racism. Up at the top, I recognize racism as a present and current problem. Can't put our heads in the sand about this. I seek out questions that make me uncomfortable. I understand my own privilege in ignoring racism. So chat box, anybody observe anybody in this zone in their circle of friends?
Before we go, there's someone that said they were confused about the fear zone. What does the fear refer to here? And then we had another person saying they were just as guilty of saying that, but see the differences. They were raised to never judge a book by the cover, which we've all, have heard that and probably have been raised that way as well, and get to know each and every one because it goes both ways with every race.
Absolutely. Now, again, one thing you'll know about this diagram is the word white isn't used at all. So this isn't about white people only. Black folks are racist too. Don't get that confused. Hispanic folks are racist. Asian folks are racist, or race bias. And the first question is, what is meant by fear? It is shying away from or avoiding an elephant in a room, right? Because you don't know what to say, you don't know how to address it. You're scared that, it may be personalized against you. You're afraid to ask those hard questions that you're not afraid to in the learning zone. So there's a number of different angles to look at that word fear.
Yeah, I'm just jumping in real quick. Two quick things that I had, when you said, it's not about necessary, everybody's can be racist at one time. I'm just thinking about, and a lot of times it's based on your past experiences or not having a past experience. I think about my father who grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and saw, a totally different kind of environment. So even to this day, at times he struggles with trusting one race over the next when it comes to certain things. And it's not necessarily because that person who's not the same race has given them a reason to not trust them, but his past experiences has weighed on that. So he still struggles with that, to this day. And he's, 70 something years old. So, I like that Steve said, it's not about, white person being racist. Everybody has that at one time or another. The other quick story I'll have is I remember my first day moving into Ohio State dorm. We were at Morrill Tower in a suite with like 8 people, and it was me and another guy who played football, and then the rest of my suite mates were white, and it was this one guy in particular. Everybody was so excited, to move in, and then once all the parents left, he came up to me super excited. He said, "Let me see your tail," and I'm like, I'm thrown back. I'm like, what are we talking about here? And, I took offense, obviously, initially, but then I realized the education aspect of him growing up. He had never seen a Black person up close. And his whole time growing up, his parents, all they called Black people monkeys. So he literally, from an education standpoint, like that, he assumed Black people had tails because that's what his parents did. So I speak to that from the education aspect of it's important to, and even though that sounds like outlandish, but it's important to educate ourselves on, what's going on outside of our bubble that we're currently in.
Jim, any comments?
Well, I think the recognition part of it is, the key is that when you don't, it goes back to society where you grow up, how you've been educated. Okay, a lot of times you'll hear people of another race, I don't see racism, because you haven't really seen it. Now, you may experience maybe a bias within the structure of which you work, whether that's a social bias, maybe a classism bias, but not so much a racist bias from the powers that be. And that's why a lot of the subtle racist comments or things that happen, you can't recognize because it really hasn't happened to you. It's like little things that I can catch, especially being an African-American, a basketball player, that I would catch right away. It's like from a business person to somebody, well, you're very articulate. Well, if I'm standing next to a young man, a white man happens to be my same age, and we're saying, a white man, well, he won't say that to him. He'll say that to me because it's kind of like he's a little surprised that I'm able to articulate what I'm talking about. But in his mind, he's paying me a compliment, okay? But that same compliment is dispersed a different way to, let's say, someone in his own culture, okay? Or it's, well, you represent your people well. Well, it's the same thing that if it's a guy in his culture, he doesn't really say it like that. So I recognize racism is a present and current problem. I get when people say it, but then it goes to, instead of I understand my own privilege and ignoring racism, is sometimes I don't understand my own privilege because it hasn't happened to me. I haven't seen it numerous times. So when other people of race minorities brings these subject matters up, it's hard for the person in question to rationalize what that means. And that's part of the learning zone of opening up the mind a little bit more and understanding why, what, and how, what we're talking about and how it affects us. Those in the minority that have been there, done that, so to speak.
Great point.
Steve, we're getting
I think, yeah, I saw a comment coming in about their son dating someone from another race, or maybe it was their daughter. And my son is married to a Caucasian woman. And so that made me grow quite a bit in terms of racial, some racial biases that I had. You know what happens in black barbershops, Maurice and Jim, a lot of conversation, and that's right. Maybe I'm sorry. But I mean, sometimes there's pretty thick race discussions in there.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I mean, again, that's just an example that everybody's racist. And I will say racially biased, right? It's when you act affirmatively to oppress, suppress, discriminate, hate, harm, kill, that racism comes out as something very dangerous.
Right.
Now, the growth zone, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I identify how I may unknowingly benefit from racism. Down at the bottom, I surround myself with others who think and look differently than me. So you're really leaning into that difference. I speak out when I see racism in action. Me sitting in that barbershop chair, I really haven't mustered the courage to speak out against the brothers and sisters that are talking a little bit on the edge there, right? So that's my bad. I have to stand up and have that courage, and we all have to have zero tolerance about that, or else we become complicit in it, right? Silence is acquiescence, right? So let's move on to the next slide.
Wait, Steve, before we move on, somebody was talking about the DeFranco's book, Distinguish Racist and Racism as being a structural institutional act and is more for the Black experience, whereas members of each race can have racial insensitive towards another race. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
This was a book that they're referring to?
Yeah, DeFranco's book.
In my list of books?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, if they can unmute themselves and verbally.
Oh, it's D'Angelo. I'm sorry, it's D'Angelo. They had the wrong name. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, White Fragility is a great book. You know, the context of that is white folks are very fragile about being called out, right? That whole idea of white privilege. White folks aren't used to having the word white associated with anything, right? It's always Black or African American or Hispanic, and they are invisible. White privilege is invisible, so they don't have to put a white label on it. You know, one thing that points this out from a gender standpoint is, why does it have to be WNBA? Or why was it NBA in the first place? Why does it have to be LPGA? And why did it have to be PGA in the first place? You know, again, these concepts of everything is normal because this is the way we see the world and you have to fit into us makes it incumbent upon others to create their own WNBA leagues, their own LPGA tours, so that they can have their own opportunities to show people how good they are at these sports. You know, Jesse Jackson used to say that we never knew how good baseball was until everybody could play. We never knew how good golf was until everybody could play, and on, right? So as society has opened up, it's benefited our society. Diversity has benefited our society by allowing everybody the opportunity to participate. Now we got a panel interlude, and I want the panelists to really take a deep dive into these couple of thoughts. What are your thoughts on the recent social unrest and racial injustices? And the list of names are far too long. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, you know, Rashawn Brooks, you know, I mean, Walter Scott, I could go on and on and on and on and on. But what are your thoughts on the recent social unrest and racial injustices? And I'll just throw both of them out there at the same time, and we'll spend about 15 minutes discussing these two thoughts. Have you personally, panelists, experienced racism in a way that you're comfortable in sharing? I was going to start with Jim, but I think he had to step away. Jeremy, why don't you start?
No, I'm here. Go ahead. Go start with. I'll go last. I'll just chime in whenever. I just like to sit and listen a little bit.
Okay, Jeremy.
Okay, well, you know, for me, I would say I think it was more, I would consider it to be ignorance, but I learned through just in the last few years that ignorance can also be a form of racism, unless we want to learn and educate from that. So back when I was in middle school, I was at in a study hall, and there was a couple of guys, and they were asking me if I was considered Black or white, and I was like, well, I'm Indian. And they're like, no, in this country, you either have to be black or white. And I was like, no, I'm Indian. And it was just, you know, it kind of got me in trouble because I accidentally kicked the guy and I got detention and stuff. But the point being is that's always stayed with me, right? Because even here, like to this day, I remember the guy's name that, you know, just didn't understand there was a difference of culture. It wasn't so much that I'm in America and therefore I have to be one race or the other. So I guess that's one of my experiences. And I've had some other ones, like when we talked about the workplace and having projects versus being promoted, you know, having growth opportunities versus being recognized for the efforts, you know. So that certainly has happened over time. That I think I'm, you know, again, it's all about kind of learning and wanting to educate ourselves and helping others to learn and educate themselves too along the way.
That's a great point, Yerby. Everybody tries to put us in boxes, right? No, you're either black or white. This exercise I take folks through, let me identify myself. I ask them to self-identify their cultural orientation. I'm trying to get them away from classifying themselves by race. In other words, I've had people say, I'm a Polish American. You know, he didn't say he was white, he's Polish, right? So that tells a lot about who that person is and the cultural influences they have. Or I'm not black, I'm from Brazil. My skin is dark, but I'm Brazilian, right? So that opens up the door for people to lean in and want to learn more about their culture. And it says more about the person than black, white, Asian, Hispanic, right? There's so much more to us than those racial labels that have been socially constructed by our society. Jim, what's your thoughts?
Let me see. Have I experienced racism? Yes. But, you know, I think when you're a minority, and you know, more so it surprises me. This is, and I don't know if this is good or bad, when someone from a minority group says, I haven't experienced. That's more of a surprise to me than someone that says, I had. Just because of the role it's played in the growth of this country. Now, we're up in Toledo, Ohio. Of course, it was, I've had a share of experiences, especially when I was younger. And this is how it shapes your viewpoint, being a young person, kind of being addressed a certain way. And one of the biggest ones was, you know, my junior high year, they changed our districts, our school districts, going from elementary school, which was all black school in my neighborhood, to a junior high school that was on the northwest end of Toledo that was predominantly white. And for whatever reason, they changed it, they redistricted. So we had to catch the bus from our neighborhood to the schools, DeVoe Junior High. Well, we were the second class to go to DeVoe once they redistricted the school system. The experience there was interesting because it was a shock to us, just as it was to the students and the teachers, the faculty, and the people in the neighborhood, that you had a plethora of young black men and women coming to this school. You had a few in the school, but not, you know, a fully concentrated amount. And it was totally different. I mean, some of the things that we've heard that were said to us, whether that was by the students, some of the teachers really didn't know how to address and handle mentally, or speak with or speak to our challenges as young black males and females coming from the central city. The neighborhood itself, having an influx of young black men and women, didn't really accept that part of it. So we had a lot of issues in regards to if we had a party after school, it could be some fights. If we were going to some of the stores and restaurants right around there, it would be not the best environments for 12, 13-year-old, 14-year-olds. So to me, and you know, as a student, I'm like, listen, I don't want to come here anyway. I just want to go to school, but I don't have a choice. But it showed me at that time, and you know, we didn't see, because we lived in the central city, and we didn't have a lot of white kids around us, but we did sometimes in the neighborhood. But that really stuck with me as a young male, of how deeply rooted it was in a culture in Toledo, Ohio, that we just came from, another side of town to come here to go to school. And what we experienced was just, now, it wasn't all bad, because I tell you this, the principal there, Mr. Hart, was one of the best men I ever met in my life, because his whole thing was, I don't care if you're black, brown, if you're Spanish, if you're white, what I want, male, female, is you to have a quality education. And that helped balance, some of the challenges that we had as students. But that right there kind of really brought it all together for from being young at that time, about what racism really is.
I got a question here. How does everyone feel about wanting to segregate again from Black Lives Matter? I'm not familiar with a desire to segregate due to BLM, but I think segregation is a bad idea, period. I'll just be on record, with that. I don't know, any panelists have any thoughts? And first, Maurice, why don't you dive in here and respond to these two questions in your own way?
So thoughts on the recent social unrest and racial, here's the thing. There's what happened to George Floyd has been happening for a long time. What happened to Breonna Taylor has been happening. I think why it was kind of like the why it got so much attention is because it was really hard to argue, oh, he must have did something or she must have did something. Like, we literally got a chance to see the entire video of like him not doing anything and literally, it just happening to him, and how there was no other reasoning behind it. So I think that's why it's caused such an uproar, because we actually, as not just a Black community, but everyone got a chance to see this. But it's been happening, for a long time now. Like Jim said, of course we experience racism, and I think, people who haven't, that is more of like an eye-opening thing versus that, because I don't know anybody that looks like me who hasn't. I guess there's two things. I would say the first time I remember, obviously I played football, and the first time I kind of felt ashamed of playing football or playing sports in general was, I was flying on a plane. I was going to a college visit or something, and I was first class, and I'm excited, and I'm sitting next to this older white man, and he's like, what sport do you play? And I was like, I don't play sports. He's like, so were you one of those hip hop guys? And I was like, no, I don't do hip hop. I don't rap either. He's like, so they got you up here in first class and you don't do any of those? and it secretly, made me feel ashamed, because I'm like, dang, dog, can I only do first class if I'm a football player or a hip hop guy? But it made me think of things, or made me think of how people view me personally. So I thought that was, it was interesting. And then the other time I remember driving to New York from Columbus, and I believe I got stopped somewhere between Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And I still don't know to this day why I was stopped. I know I wasn't speeding, and the cop came with his dog, and told me to get out the car. And I'm nervous. I'm like, what's going on? Why are you pulling me over? He doesn't tell me. He's like, you need to get out the car. So I get out the car. Next thing you know, the dog's biting my jeans. I'm nervous. The dog's all up in my car, and obviously they don't find anything. And I'm like, what? I said, what's going on? Why did I get pulled over in the first place? And he's just like, now go about your day before I find something else, So, and I was like, what? But it just showed me that even if, just literally because I'm driving, I had a Cadillac CTS, I had 20-inch rims, tinted windows, it was burnt orange. Granted, it was flashy. I'm not gonna lie there, but I still don't think it justifies me getting pulled over and then, you know, the dog jumping all on me just because of what I was driving. So, you know, I felt like those were two things that stuck out to me.
Well, outstanding. Thanks for sharing that. Let's move on to, here's a driving while black. Well, yeah. Let's move on to the next part of our presentation. And I want to move through this content fairly quickly because I want to save ample time for our next panel interlude question and the full panel discussion towards the end. I felt it was important to define these key terms for our audience. And I approach defining these words in three ways: one word theme, a more standard definition for these words, and then a proposed definition based on best practices in the diversity and inclusion profession. And so with diversity, my one word theme there is value. Diversity is valuable. It's not a kumbaya or a nice thing to do. There is a business case to diversity. When I quoted Jesse Jackson, we didn't know how good these sports were until they let everybody play them to see how good different people were at this sport, not just white folks. And so the different backgrounds, experiences, thoughts, races, genders, etc. That's sort of the EEO definition for diversity, somewhat standard. This is how we think of diversity when that word comes up generally. And then the proposed definition, unique differences in thought, beliefs, values, life experiences, among many other human and cultural characteristics. I think that word culture is so important because, again, it gets us away from that race thing, right? Based on who we are and where we come from. Essentially, diversity is who we are, which is genetics, DNA. That's why Maurice's hair is bald, my eyes are brown, your hair is long, Jim's tall, right? And where we come from is what side of the railroad tracks we grew up on, what church we go to, what we talk about at the dinner table, what social media we listen to, what music we listen to. You know, that shapes who we are and where we come from, right? The next term, equity. Again, that one word theme, in my opinion, is exact. Equity must be exact. The more standard definition, engaging people in circumstances with fairness, justice, impartiality, honesty, balance, compassion, decency, reasonableness, and an open mind. And then the more standard definition, ensuring that people and circumstances are provided with exactly what they need to gain access to opportunity, be successful, and live a full life through understanding that fair is not always equal, and equity is not the same as equality. I just wanted to make a point about that last part of the definition. Again, fair is not always equal. If I have the same type of doorknobs on all my doors in the house, that round knob, and I'm in my office here working and someone says, hey, can you open the door? I want to get in here. I say, hey, the door's open. Come on in. Does that do any good for someone who is quadriplegic in a wheelchair? No, it doesn't. And so I have to anticipate the exact needs of whoever's outside that door to be able to allow them to get access to opportunity, to be successful, to open that door that will allow them to live a full life, right? And equity is not the same as equality. Again, gets back to Maurice's point. I'm colorblind. I treat everybody the same. No, That's not the answer with equality, I'm sorry, equity. The next term that we want to define for you in 3 ways is inclusion. The word here is success. We believe that those who do include rich diversity in their problem solving, decision making, ideation, all those kinds of things are more successful than organizations that don't. So we want to engage, value, involve, recognize, utilize, appreciate, connect, mentor, develop our empowering diversity. Going back to these statements that companies are making related to George Floyd, they say, we stand with you. We stand with you. We want them to do more than just stand with us. We want them to employ us. We want them to promote us. We want them to do business with our minority businesses. We want them to, include us in the mainstream of that opportunity. So standing is not an action. I want you to take action that shows me that you're committed. And the proposed definition, leveraging, engaging, and valuing all this diverse human and cultural characteristics. And this is the most important part of this definition, to help deliver the most creative, innovative, impactful outcomes for associates and those we serve in our society. So this is the business case, right? If you include your rich diversity, that makes you more creative, more innovative, more impactful outcomes for your customers or whoever you serve. Any questions about these 3 definitions and how we approach them? I do want to invite chat on whether you favor a 1-word theme for these words, the proposed definition, or the more standard definition. Which one resonates with you most? And does your organization that you're affiliated with have definitions for these key terms posted on the walls in your organization or on your website? Because if they don't, I think that's a problem.
Right. Hey, Steve, and while, some may be answering that question or thinking about it, let me further your conversation in regards to inclusion, part equity. A really good friend of mine owns a successful restaurant here in LA. Great guy, grew up. Father was like CEO of Disney at one point, I think CEO of Hilton. And after everything, jumped off with the George Floyd and the riots or the protests and different things like that, we had a conversation. We were at his house, and he was like, "Well, Jimmy, I want to do more. I don't believe in this, and I really want to help, and you know how I am." And I said, "Chris, I get it. I know you. I know you want to do the right thing." He said, "But Jimmy, this is not, who we are as a people, and what do I have to do more?" And I'm like, "Well, okay. You say you want to do more. You say you don't look at the cultural or color of someone's skin, or you evaluate a person based on their efforts and their competency." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." So I said, "How many people in your company are Black?" He had to think about it. I said, "Moreover, how many people in your company that, if they are Black or minority, have a position that has the ability to make a decision, a power position?" He said, "None." I said, "That's what I'm talking about. I'm not saying go out and hire just to hire a minority to have it. But have you really truly looked at that as an option for your business?" Now, you say you want to do more. A lot of people say that. But if you don't start within and hiring and looking at, maybe that's a female in that position. But until you take accountability for what you're not doing, you're saying the right thing, Chris. I love you to death. But your actions within your organization don't reflect the words that you're talking.
I see people sharing some of their experiences in the chat box, and I really appreciate you. And I think that we're going to capture these, Yervi, to maybe round out our experience and increase everybody's learning. Maybe you can distribute these to the participants. I don't know.
They're going to everybody. The chats are going to everybody already.
Okay. I hear the proposed definition resonates with me more. My school district has a targeted equity for student achievement. Um, I know there's some other chats coming in. Well, let's move on. And thanks for sharing that, Jim. You have anything to share?
That was good, Jim. I just wanted to throw that out there. That was good. I like that.
Yeah.
Just two quick graphs to show one fundamental thing. We are soon going to be a majority minority race, and there goes that word again, country. Some say by 2050, some say by 2060, some say by 2065, but it's going to happen, bottom line. The green represents the Asian population, and while they are small in volume, they are the fastest growing minority group in this country. You'll see the total population between 2018 and 2060 leaped by basically 1/3, from 6 to 9, basically, versus the other racial jumps were not proportionally nearly as large as those. Critical mass, Hispanic population has the largest numbers in 2060 of growth, that is, while you see the white race shrinking from 2018 to 2060. I want you to focus in on age under 18. And again, we have a burgeoning Hispanic population in 2060, still a real growth spurt in Asian. African-American is fairly steady in both of these categories. There is some growth, but not nearly as much as the other racial groups. And the interesting thing about age 65 and over, that's where the white population is real dominant, right? Which means that there's going to be more older white folks around in 2060 versus younger folks. And you see the significant gap right now in 2018 versus the rest of the ethnic population. The next slide just clearly demonstrates how the population overall will decline in all races between 2018 and 2016. However, look at the huge gap between the growth population of minority groups, the blue line up top, versus the gray line, the white population at the bottom. So again, this is to show everybody on this call the thing that I said before: no walls or laws will be able to stop the inevitable diversification of our society. It's going to happen. Those who are ready for it, get ahead of it, tap into the buying power of those minority groups, are going to be more successful than those who don't. Now we'll go to our second panel discussion interlude. And I want to turn to Jim Jackson and Maurice Hall to just get an athlete's perspective. What are your thoughts on athletes giving voice to racial injustice issues? Obviously, one that comes to mind, Maurice, in football is Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, right? In many ways, he kicked this whole thing off in modern day. Tommy Davis did his black glove fist at the Olympics way back, and that was really a start. Muhammad Ali did his thing back when he did it and failed to go into a war that he didn't philosophically believe in, and spent some time for that. And then with basketball, recently it's LeBron James, Jim Jackson. So not that you have to comment on those particular individuals, but as athletes, football stars, basketball stars, what are your thoughts on athletes giving voice to racial injustices these days?
So I'm going to answer that. I do want to make sure we don't forget. I saw a question in the chat that I just want to make sure we did too after this.
Yeah.
Just don't let me forget. Yeah, I mean, we all know, the stance that Colin Kaepernick took and how it was perceived, not just from white folks, from black folks as well. You know, I know some black folks was like, oh, you need to pick a different way to go about it. I believe in it, you know, so, or you're against the flag and all these things that we know weren't true, to the point where now the NFL is like, yes, you know, whatever you want to do it, you know, because at the end of the day, I think it comes down to money. But I say all that to say that, you know, athletes, whatever position you're in, even as just a regular person, we all have a voice, you know, we should be all entitled to use our voice. And when you get to a certain level, like a NFL or NBA or Oprah or whoever, you should be able to use your voice. Now, here's the thing. Just because you use your voice doesn't mean people have to agree with it, right? So if people don't agree, that's everybody's, you know, own thing, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't be able to express it, just because I'm on a certain level and I do a certain job, you know. I always try to tell, and that was, I would say that was a hard thing for me after I finished football, especially growing up in Columbus, going to Ohio State. It was very hard for me to separate who I was versus what I did, because everyone associates me as Maurice, the football player, you know, since ninth grade or eighth grade in Columbus. So it kind of, coming to LA really detached me from it, because I don't even talk about football unless there's somebody that I meet or, you know, come across that went to Ohio State or talks about football. So, but I say all that to say that you should be able to separate who you are from what you do. So just because I do this doesn't mean I have to silence who I am and what I believe in, at any point in time. So that's my thoughts.
Maurice, when you were saying that, I was thinking, like, you shouldn't have to be two different people, right? You can be one person and do your thing, say your speak.
Absolutely. And you know, I feel like I've kind of done that my whole life. And maybe that's why I got into acting, because, you know, as Maurice, the man, the black man, the athletically built man, I have to I can't be my 100% self all the time, because when I'm talking to people, I can't talk I have to talk a certain way when I'm talking to certain people, and I can talk the way I want to talk when I'm talking to other people. And it's literally because I don't want to make other people uncomfortable, or I don't want to have them think, oh, he's, you know. And Jim brought up a good point. I think since I used to do a lot of speaking engagements and things like that, and the number one thing people would come up to me and say, oh my goodness, you speak so well. You're so well spoken. And I was like, and I never thought anything of it. It was like, oh, thanks so much. I appreciate it. But when you really look back at it, it's like, is that really a compliment? Like, I speak so well, so well spoken. I mean, I got degrees, but you know, it is what it is. But I'll let Jim go now.
Well, I was going to say that at the end of this thing today, but I won't now. And I'm just.
No, I have an interesting story. You know, on the phone, I was talking to someone about supplier diversity, and he didn't agree with it at all. He said, you know, these black folks need to stop asking for a handout, blah, blah, blah. So it was obvious that he didn't know I was black, right? And so it was quite an interesting conversation when I let him know that I was an African-American, and you could probably see his face turn red even over the phone.
You know, I can relate to that, because I'll tell you, like, people don't always think I'm Indian, so they can think I'm Mexican. I've even been called Russian. Italian, and sometimes I'll just go with it because but most times I try to correct them. So that's true. It's like perception is everything, right? And it's up to us to clear it up.
Jim, your thoughts on athletes giving voice?
I totally agree with it, and I want to kind of put it encapsulate this. The iconic figure in speaking out, especially in the black community, is Muhammad Ali, okay, because of who he is. But you got to keep in mind that when Muhammad Ali was actually taking a stance for what he believed in, whether that was when he changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, whether he chose not to go to the Vietnam War, when he spoke out, this was at a time where it took courage to do what he did. Easily, he could have been lynched, killed, mobbed, in prison, whatever. So he stepped out on the line when things were at a high cost to him personally and financially. He stood out at that time. And keep in mind, back then, many people in the Black community felt that he was hurting the movement a lot more than helping the movement, because they wanted kind of status quo. Who's this big mouth Black guy talking about whites and not doing this? And they felt at times it was a hindrance. So the Muhammad Ali that we worship today and we see and we hold to high standards, it wasn't looked upon the same way when he spoke. Kind of like when Colin Kaepernick chose to take the knee, you had a division on both sides, whether it was right or wrong, right or black, whatever it may be. My thing with athletes speaking out, okay, is in today's world, and I want to frame this so you understand what I'm saying. As an athlete speaking out today, because everything that's happened, it doesn't take a lot of courage because everybody's doing it. My thing is that if you're going to speak out, one, understand history and why we're at this point. Because if you're engaged in a conversation, you're talking about something, please understand what your argument is, what your case is, and what you're basing, the information you're basing it off of. Get all the information and then argue your point. So athletes, I think, have done a better job of, before they're trying to speak about something, they're trying to educate themselves on the subject matter or whatever it may be, so they can articulate their point a lot better. I think the athlete today, because of social media, because the world now is smaller, has a bigger, broader platform. But you have to be careful with that platform and how you use it, how you disseminate that information. But also you have to be able to listen as an athlete. You don't know it all. You're trying to figure it out, and who you align yourself and your beliefs with are also important, because all of those things impact the influence or lack thereof that you'll have once you start to push your narrative. You know what I mean? So, and I saw where it was a comment too, I think Angelique talked about history and history repeating itself. And that's why I always go back to the question is, how did we get here? Unless you really understand history, especially here in America, okay, of how we've gotten to this point. It wasn't back in '65 with the Civil Rights and Fair Housing Acts. This stuff started the American Revolutionary War, when the Britons felt they were second-class citizens, and they said, enough is enough. We're taking over. We're not doing this anymore. To after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction time, when you had civil rights laws, when you had the 14th, 15th Amendments, okay, that were put in place, but yet and still you had to fight for it in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and you're still fighting for some of it. Understanding the history, Angelique, is very important, and not forgetting it, but also teaching that history so that we as Black people re-educate ourselves, and not only white people, not only other minorities. So that's a longer, broader answer to the question. But in a sense, yes, I do believe athletes, and I like that athletes are stepping up, but it has to be a bigger, broader platform.
Thanks, Jim. That's an excellent answer. And, getting back to Maurice, you can be an athlete and be able to do other things, right? So just as even African Americans felt that Muhammad Ali should just shut up and be a boxer, there's a conservative talk host, and I won't name her name, who said LeBron James just needs to shut up and play basketball. Right?
Go ahead and say it. Say it. We know who it is. Go ahead and say it.
but that's the wrong message. No, you don't tell me what I need to do, or you don't put me in a box. And everybody wants to put us in boxes. So that's the danger. And let's get back to that chat box question that I'm sorry I missed. Maurice, did you know what that was? Or?
Yeah, I got it. So it's basically what to do when there's interracial racism.
What to do when there's interracial racism?
Yes.
I have a prime example. My son, as I said, is married to a Caucasian woman. When they were dating, they were in Atlanta. They both met as interns at Deloitte. My son is a CPA. She's a cybersecurity consultant. So she's an AI consultant. He's a CPA. So they both have successful international careers, right? And he might be on this call, Steve Jr. But they had a hate note written on their car as he was helping her move out of her apartment so that they could live together. And, you know, the shameful thing about it, you kind of knew who wrote the note, because the author was criticizing why my son was dating a white woman. What, black women aren't good enough for you type thing, right? And there was even a typo in the hate note. You know, I mean, hey, if you're going to write a hate note, make sure it's grammatically correct, right? So anyway, but anyway, my son and his now wife responded. First, they were kind of really caught off guard, because that was one of the rare times that my son has really head-on faced racism. And so again, this is an example of black females likely lashing out against my son because they felt he shouldn't commingle with another race, right? But again, they both have life lessons to learn as they continue in their marital relationship, that this type of thing is going to happen both from white folks and from black folks who see their union differently. They want them to fit into the box that they want them to fit in. And they don't want them to be able to be contrary to their way of seeing things. I hope that answered the question.
Well, yes. Sorry. Also, my nephew, I mean, he's biracial. I mean, come to find out, my grandfather is black, but he was light enough when he came from France, him and his family, they put him down as white. We just found all this out. But my thing is, you're either not dark enough, or you're too light, or, I mean, how do we explain? I mean, because there's more biracial children in this world than I believe there ever has. But what do you do in your own race when you have biracial children and either race won't accept them? That's, I guess, where I'm at, and I guess I need to be educated more.
I think that fear zone, learning zone, growth zone diagram, becoming anti-racist, may be instructive for them. Just at the next dinner table conversation, share that diagram with them and say, hey, I see you landing on here in one of these zones. Let's try to learn more about each other and have some tolerance and acceptance about particularly interracial relationships, because we're smack dab in the middle of them, you know, so they're not going away.
I mean, I know myself, I've always put other, because I'm French, I'm German, I'm Italian. We're made of everything. We're not just how, I mean, I may sound naive, but I was never raised that you're one particular race.
Well, no, this Angelique, and thank you for speaking out.
Sorry.
I had a session that I did just this week where we focused on the 2020 census, and that's coming out now if you haven't answered it already. And they just give you certain categories where you're forced to say you're either black, 2 or more, white, Hispanic. So getting back to my example before, what if you're Irish American? What if you're Italian American? What if you got Italian and Native American in you? What if you want to explain what all that means culturally to who you are? And so, again, race being a social construct, they changed the census to meet their needs of capitalism, not to meet people's individual needs of being self-identified. So these racial categories mean nothing. I welcome you to identify yourself in all the multiple cultures that represent who you are. And good for you for wanting to do that. I mean, we're forced on the census to check that one box, right? But diversity is more than checking a box.
Steve, we also have a question on here or a statement, I should say. This society puts professional athletes on a pedestal. Many, in parentheses, most whites were offended when Black athletes used their voices. Any thoughts on that, Mo or Jim?
Yeah, I got thought. I was actually, this is Jimmy, I was actually about to write Emily back on that because it's very true. But again, throughout the history, not only in the United States, but of the world, people who had special talents always been put on a pedestal. I don't care if they were artists, musicians, actors, actresses, certain politicians were viewed upon a little bit different. It's always been a part of the history of America, for whatever reason it may be. Now, here's the difference too, is that how you use the voice and who agrees with you, who doesn't agree. If I'm an athlete and I say, well, in a racial context that I don't agree with Colin Kaepernick, well, the majority of the people who like that are going to agree with me and going to like me even more. If I disagree and say that I'm with Colin, I understand why he's doing it, we need more accountability. Now, if you're on the other side of that fence, that's when you're going to get upset. So, you know, society has always been a star-driven kind of place, and star meaning people who do some maybe extraordinary things probably get treated a little bit differently, and not always athletes, but people in general. So I agree with you on that, and I do agree that when Black athletes, especially now, this, you know, using your voice to talk about Black Lives Matter and everything else, a lot of people of non-color don't want to hear. They really do not. They just, I want to get back to sports. I don't want to hear anything else about it. Let's just get back to this, because indirectly to them, it doesn't affect them. How are you speaking as an athlete? You made millions of dollars. You're the American dream. Well, kind of, yeah, a little bit, but I'm not just speaking for myself. I'm speaking for, as an athlete, other people kind of coming up and going through what's happening in the world.
Thank you, Jim. Well, let's move on, and we're going to have an extended panel discussion here in the next 10 minutes to round out this session. But I wanted to spend a couple of minutes, just a very short couple of minutes, on two slides. The first slide, I want the chat box activity to kick back up again. After we discuss the 4 points on this slide, I want you to chat which one of these points is most surprising or most disappointing to you. And you can just name number 4, most disappointing, number 3, most surprising, in the chat box. And I'll read them through for you. This is related to the business case of diversity. And again, we want to really reestablish that diversity means value. It is valuable. First point, there are fewer Fortune 500 CEOs who are women, 4.1%, than who are named David, 4.5%, or John, 5.3%. 2 single male names outnumber an entire gender. It's according to the New York Times. Again, at the end, which one is most surprising or disappointing to you? Put that in the chat box. Number 2, only 5 out of all Fortune 500 companies have African American CEOs. Only 5 out of 500. Number 3, 40% of people think there's a double standard against hiring women. And this is a gender-focused question. Both men and women are more likely to hire men over women. In other words, if a woman was faced with the choice of hiring a man or a woman in a final interview, that woman is more likely to hire the man, just because of male bias. Number 4, men are 30% more likely than women to be promoted from entry level to manager. You remember the scenario I used Jim Jackson and Yervi Saturio on? Yervi got the promotion, the perpetual promotion. Jim got promoted every single time. That's what that number 4 speaks to. So participants, which one is most surprising or disappointing? Go ahead and chat. Number 1.
Number 1 is most surprising.
Number 1.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that too.
Any others? Number 1 and 2 are surprising. I'm going to weigh in and say that number 3 is the most surprising to me.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts on surprising or disappointing? Which one is the most? More are surprising, but all are disappointing. Or I'm sorry, none are surprising, but all are disappointing.
We also have no one's comment about diversity of thought, only ethnicity and gender. Find that surprising and disappointing.
I think diversity of thought is tied to kind of all of this. When we do diversify our thinking, you know, it allows us to be more open to what's going on around us or the potential biases that we might have within ourselves. So I think we kind of talked about it, but I definitely, I mean, I'd love to hear more about your thoughts as well, as far as, you know, diversity of thought and kind of what you're thinking.
Well, let's go back to that diversity definition, not on the slides, but remember, the proposed definition was diversity of thought, not those visible things, race and all those other things, and gender, but diversity of thoughts, beliefs, values, life experiences. Those invisible things, I argue, are the most valuable part of who makes up people as their diverse selves. So to the questioner's point, our biases of what we see, we make 90% of our judgments based on the 10% that we see, right? It's the 90-10 rule. So in fact, race and gender has clouded our ability to think clearly. Our biases kick in and we rob those who may have diversity of thought from the opportunity to demonstrate that they have great thought by leaning on our bias based on their race or their gender. So certainly there's probably other examples that focus on diversity of thought, but the very idea that we can't even get to what people think because we can't work through our biases, that's the problem. And so these points are to show that we have to get beyond all the race and gender biases to get to the valuable part of who people are, which is by and large invisible. All right, let's go to the next slide. Again, question is, which one of these is most surprising or most disappointing? Resumes submitted by people with African-American sounding names are 14% less likely to get a call back than those with white sounding names. And again, I don't know what African-American sounding versus white sounding means, but you read between the lines.
Devontae, Turquoise,
Yeah, compared to Charles,
Colin,
John and David, like you said, John and Dave are the, you know, more John and Daves than women, which is
right, John and Dave, right. Number 6, 67% of job seekers said a diverse workforce is important when considering job offers. Number 7, 57% of employees think their companies should be more diverse. These are existing employees that think this. Number 8, 41% of managers say they are too busy to implement diversity initiatives. Again, this gives a peek into what managers think about diversity. They don't see it as valuable, do they? Because they're too busy to focus on something that's not as important as what they think other things are. Number 9, 83% of millennials are more actively engaged when they believe their company fosters an inclusive culture. And in 10 years, millennials will comprise nearly 75% of the workforce. 75% in 10 years will be millennials who think very differently than the other generations, like baby boomers like me. The U.S. will no longer have a single ethnic or racial majority by the year 2065. Again, 2050, 2060, 2065, you pick it. So which one is most surprising or disappointing? Go ahead and chat.
I have to ask you for number 8, is that recently? Like not since George Floyd or anything, but in the last couple of years?
Yeah, these are the last couple of years. This is 2018 numbers.
Okay.
Or at least this is when I put this material together. 2018, 2019.
Right.
Number, what is that?
8.
8. I tell you, the one that is most surprising to me is, was that surprise number 8, is that right?
Yep.
That in 10 years, nearly 75% of the workforce will be millennials. And we are now experiencing younger generations managing older generations much more frequently in our workplaces, and that throws a whole nother dynamic into workplace dynamics. All right, well, thanks for weighing in on that. I want to spend the last 20 minutes on the panel discussion, and so we'll skip over the next slide on psychological safety. And again, I want to really thank Yervi, Jim, and Maurice for really throughout the whole workshop chiming in and giving some awesome perspectives and insight, both personal and as you've seen it as professional athletes and even actors and businessmen. You know, I know, Jim, you're a successful entrepreneur. I wanted to get into 4 questions for the panel. The first question, in your view, the role of higher education in societal change. Most notably, The Ohio State University, but any higher education institute. Number 2, returning to campus during COVID-19 and social unrest. The third point, returning to sports during COVID-19 and social unrest. So while we were on the workshop, I think an entire 3-game series for 2 baseball teams was canceled due to COVID. I mean, again, this is something that we have never seen before in more than 100 years. And we're trying to force our new normal on it. And let me just say this, COVID is not blue or red, but people are trying to make it blue or red. And that's just not gonna work, right? We have to treat this thing factually, scientifically, and like we have some common sense, or else people are gonna continue to die. And number 4 speaks to that new normal. What is your new normal in light of COVID-19 and social unrest? Now, I'll just throw it out to any of the panelists to chime in on any one of those 4 discussion points, and I'll just kick it off for you guys.
Well, I'll jump out there first. Mine is, I'm a big proponent of education. And the first one kind of talks about the higher education, but I think that the re-education of the system itself, starting on the elementary level, I think that's where really the impact has to be made, and that for blacks, whites, because the thought processes have to be looked at totally differently. And it's not as easy as said as done, because our teachers have to be taught in order to reteach the system itself, to go against their norms. And I think when you look at young men and women growing up, I don't care if you're white, black, whatever it is, whatever the history you're being taught in school is what you kind of live and die with. That secondary education that we tend to get outside of school is when we branch out a little bit more and learn more. But to me, in order to get to higher education and societal change, education has to start at the roots level and really teaching our history, whether that's African American history, Native American history, Anglo-Saxon history, and teach the truth about it. So then we don't have these different conflicts as we move forward, because what we're taught when we're young, especially in schools, in our history books, is kind of what shapes our thought process. And Angelique, you're right. When you're young, like I have a 2-year-old, my son, if he sees somebody else, an adult, if he doesn't like him, he doesn't like him because maybe bad aura, or they didn't give him a toy. It's not because they're black or white or Chinese, whatever. He has to be taught that. And that's what I say about the re-education at the bottom level. If we're only teaching one kind of history in schools to our children, black, white, or whatever, that forms a mindset and also takes away from the minority perspective of who we are and what we contributed to this society. So that's where I think it goes from and how it ratchets us up. Instead of trickle down, trickles up to the higher education part and ultimately societal changes, because the kids now are going to be totally different, like we saw in a lot of those charts, than those before us.
Thanks, Jim. Maurice?
I was just looking at, I totally agree with Jim as far as the higher education piece. Having 3 daughters, 5 and younger, you know, going back to school, I would love it. But I think the big thing that we have to kind of look at here is what's the best thing for society as a whole. You know, I think a lot of times we get, you know, which is, you know, rightfully so at times, you know, get caught up in our own situation. And it's like, man, this is not working for me, or, you know, but overall as a whole, what is the best situation and best thing that's going to help us as society, you know, and just talking about returning to campus or returning to sports, you know, during COVID. You know, obviously people, I've seen so many things on social media, like let the kids play. And, you know, obviously kids want to play because, you know, it's something, it's a livelihood that you've grown up and you want to do, and, or go to actual class versus online. But at the end of the day, what's the best thing for everyone as a whole? And if we can kind of focus on that, I think it makes things a lot easier and allows us to understand a lot better versus, hey, let's just go to class and hope for the best or deal with it if it comes. Because at the end of the day, that's not helping anybody.
There's a lot of chat coming in, and I appreciate everybody's
Yeah.
comments. Yervi, do you have any comments on any of these questions or
I
statements?
do. So I was going to talk about the new normal for me, I think, in light of the COVID and social unrest. And, you know, from our discussion the other day, prepping for this Zoom meeting today, I have to look more within my community, within my own culture, and, you know, confront racist ideas that I hold or even others hold, right? And I want to champion anti-racism and ideas and policies and move forward in that direction, whether it's through volunteerism, whether it's through my workplace. And that includes, you know, speaking up, not just because of the culture I'm in, but also being a woman. So that's the things I take away from this.
How about campus, returning to campus or returning to school? Those of you who said you have little ones, or do you feel comfortable with them going back to school?
Hey, I'll tell you mine a 2-year-old in preschool. They shut it down, you know, right when in March. They opened back up in June, but we held our little one out because I wanted to ensure that the protocols, health and safety, were kind of implemented, put in place. They felt comfortable about it, gave it time to kind of work, ask questions, and then we put him back in school in July. Now, preschool was a lot different too because there's a limited number of students and faculty that interact with each other. The likelihood or the chances that a younger, a kid would get COVID is a lot less. But it was in my mind, I thought about the adults that were coming in and out of the facility, how that affects, of course, my young one. But they've done a lot to ensure that the safety precautions were at the highest level. But we did ultimately decide to put our son back in preschool. Now, again, that's different than, grade school, junior high, high school, kids going back to college, of course, because the numbers are less.
Maurice, what's your new normal?
My new normal? Obviously, the great thing, I think, that we are able to capitalize on is the technology aspects. Like, imagine if this happened, 20 years, 15, 20 years ago, like, how would we have responded to this, without the technology we have today? So I think, you should definitely invest in Apple, and but the technology we have allows our children, my children, my oldest daughter who's 5 starts kindergarten next week, and it's going to be online. So I think that's and the hard part is you just have to adjust to it as a parent, because her starting kindergarten, she's going to need someone right there, parent-wise, to essentially co-teach. So, it's definitely not something my wife or I had planned, based on our work schedules. But, we adjust to it to make sure she's got everything that she needs in order to make that happen, and then adjust our lives to it, as we continue to go until, it gets back to something that, looks like we can change it again. So, something that has to happen, and we're looking forward to it and working through it.
Maurice, the MAC conference just canceled all football games.
All that.
Do you think we will have college football this year?
Okay. Yes, I do. I think they're going to try their hardest, especially to, Division One football is a $1 billion industry in itself. So the great part is these colleges have, maybe not the MAC, but the big time colleges have the resources to do everything they can to prevent these players from contracting COVID, in order to make sure we can get them on the field and make the money for the university. At the end of the day, that's what I believe it's about. Obviously, the players want to play. Who doesn't? When you want, everybody wants to play. So that's not a downside of the players wanting to play. At the end of the day, if as long as everyone can be safe, and it is about the safety, I'm all for it. But at the same time, I know what it is.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
Can I go back to this right here? And I think the returning to campus is a really more diverse question. And I saw that Kristen chimed in about her school district 100% online, thought it'd be okay with the hybrid. But I think the mindset also is different, because if you're in an area of the city that you don't have the economic means, okay, for online classes, meaning maybe your Wi-Fi spotty, you don't have the computers, the impetus to go back to school is a lot different than maybe if you're in a suburban area or a area where the income level is a lot higher that allows you those luxuries to do it. So that's a two-phase question depending on who you ask in regards to kids going back to school and what that means. Because if you're in an area where the economic means allows you to not lose much step educationally, because you can afford to have the ability to be taught online, compared to when you're in the central city environment where you have more challenges to the learning aspect. What happens is, while this group is still learning, even though they're online, this group that's out is probably falling further behind because they don't have access to the same learning tools that compared to their counterparts.
I mean, that's a great point, Jim. I thought about the families that don't have Wi-Fi or internet at
That's what I'm saying, right?
And
Yeah.
so I imagine the public libraries being swamped with folks trying to get in there to have internet access so they can do their work and take their classes. But otherwise, you know, what are they going to do?
So Steve,
I'm not speaking from a black and white, just from a black perspective, because you have other minorities or other cultures, white, black, whatever it is, that don't have the means at times to be able to do that. So it's just not a black and white thing. You know what I mean?
Kristen, you're weighing in. Go ahead.
oh, I work in a 95% free lunch school, and we gave out 600 Chromebooks and 600 hotspots, and we started school on Monday.
Wow.
We are missing 100 students, but now we're focusing in on those 100. So it is a very big challenge, but we are 100% ready to help our students. We want all students online.
What
That's a
district are
great
you
point.
Where are you at?
90,
I work in San Bernardino, California.
Oh, you're in San Bernardino. Okay.
Yes, sir.
you said 95% free lunch?
No, sir, 99.
99. Wow.
Oh, just think about that. Kids that depend on the school for their food.
So we give out food also. Their parents come up on Monday or Wednesdays, and we give them their breakfast, lunch, and I also serve snack dinner at my school, and they get it for the week.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
Kristen, I had a quick question for you, and this is just, I'm asking it just because this came up from my daughter's school. What are you all doing for parents who can't afford to take time off work? You know, they got to go to work, although school's online. Like I don't know if you've come across that or not, but I'm just wondering.
That is a big factor. A lot of my parents aren't working at this time, but the parents that are working, we do asynchronous learning and count it, which means most of my kids in grades 2 up can get on their own, but the ones that can't, like kindergarten and first grade, their parents can go on with them whenever they're home and submit the work to the teacher. Awesome. And we have videos and everything made from the teachers, and that counts as work.
Yeah, someone just chatted, childcare is a bear as well. I told my wife the other day, I can't imagine having toddlers during the times when it's cost $700, $1,000 a month for childcare, right? Or am I understating that?
No, more than that. Depending on what you do, I mean, it's a challenge right now. It really is for a lot of people with that. And a great point in regards to a single parent or 2-parent household that has to go to work. It's a lot easier if you have a child that maybe is in high school. You can leave home and can trust that will be able to do the work. But when you start dealing with that lower demographic, you know, children that are younger, that's a stress and a challenge on those parents on, okay, I got to go to work, but I got my child that can't go to school. I mean, I would hate to be in that situation.
Someone just chatted in $1,500 a month for their 1-year-old for daycare.
Yeah.
Imagine somebody with 3-4 kids, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Mine is about $1,200, $1,300 a month.
Well, I know that we're coming close to the end of our 2 hours. Yerby, did you want to add any final comments or points or housekeeping? Or
I do. First of all, I just want to thank you, Mo and Jim, for joining us today. It was really important to have this discussion. So I really appreciate the time you all have made for this. And our audience, really appreciate you all chiming in on the chat or speaking up. It's just made a difference in having this conversation. I hope everybody found it encouraging, reflective, understanding, and knowing that we have different voices of perspective, but we respect each other. So if you like, we would love to have feedback, and you can either email us at laclub@lsu.edu, or you can go on our Facebook, and, you know, certainly we welcome any comments, good or bad, there. And I just want to leave everybody, we talked earlier today about Ibram Kendi, and there was a quote that resonated with me when I was looking at some stuff. for today's conversation. And he said, what we say about race and what we do about it determines what, not who we are. So I leave you with that.
Very profound, Yervi. Thanks for dropping that on us and dropping the mic.
If I had one, I'd drop it for you guys. But thank you all.
All right. Thank you, audience. Thank you, Jim and
Thank
Maurice.
you. You got it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.